Symptoms of boundary problems. How do you know you have a problem? How do you know that? Huh? Because you don't feel good, right? Or somebody else will show it to you. But basically, we know that we have problems because we have symptoms. Symptoms are signs that something is wrong. The Bible calls these fruits. Now, this is a very, very important idea because too oftentimes, especially as Christians, because we have the leaven of the Pharisees within us. You know, it's there. Jesus told us to watch for it. And that is the temptation to look at the outside of the cup. In other words, to see the symptom as the problem and not go to the heart and find out the cause. See, if the tree is good, it has good fruit. If the tree is bad, it has bad fruit. Symptoms are very, very important not to see as the problem. It's not the problem. It's a result of the problem. But they're very, very important to let us know that there is a problem and what the problem is. And in this part, we'll talk about how to recognize the symptoms of boundary problems. Now, the first area we have symptoms in would be called clinical symptoms. Clinical symptoms. What that means is this, that there's some way in which I am hurting, some way in which I've got pain. When you think of a life without boundaries, no control, some jerk running over you all the time, what do you start to feel? Depressed, right? One of the big symptoms of boundary problems is depression. Now, there's a reason for that. Depression, as an affective state, is made up primarily of feelings of loss. What the Scriptures call hope deferred that makes the heart sick. And if we don't have good boundaries, if we don't have good control, over our heart, then we are perpetually in a state of loss all the time. We're wanting to be out of pain. We're wanting to be in control. We're wanting love. We're wanting the hurt to stop. And we have all of these needs and wishes and wants that are good, that are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, that want life to be better, and they're not getting answered. And the evil continues because we don't have good boundaries. And so we can be perpetually in a state of loss because we're wanting and it's not happening, and hope deferred makes the heart sick and it turns into depression. Now, there is an aspect of some kinds of depression that has to do with the second part of this, and that's the feeling of resentment. Resentment is a clinical symptom. It's a sin also. But it's clinical because it takes the toll on our body. We begin to get ulcers. We begin to get headaches. We begin to feel all sorts of toxic feelings inside throughout the day. They can measure in people's blood now changes, chemical changes, when you begin to have feelings like resentment and envy and rage and all of that stuff. And it literally begins to change everything inside. And a lot of times we will feel feelings of resentment. Why? Because we resent what we don't like, and we resent things that we can't do anything about if we're still, wanting them to change. Now, how is that a boundary problem? Because oftentimes what is happening to me is something I don't like and something that God has designed me to have power over. In other words, myself. That I should be able to make the choices and figure out what I'm going to allow in my life and what I'm not going to allow. And if that is happening, then I begin to resent my loss of freedom. And the Scripture is very, very clear. It says, don't be subject again to a yoke of slavery. And oftentimes we begin to feel like slaves because we're in somebody else's control and we resent the domination in our lives or the external control in our lives. And feelings of resentment begin to pervade everything we do. The next one, how about outbursts of rage or anger problems? Have you ever seen a cat, like a large one with stripes on it at the zoo, that gets cornered and push them way into a corner? What do they start to do? They get enraged. or a person that you begin to push further and further and further, and they're nice, and then you keep pushing against their objections and slowly begin to wear them down. And finally, there's this big ballistic explosion. Why don't you hear me or listen to me? Well, a lot of times, something very, very small can trigger those outbursts of rage because there is a lot of feelings of loss of control sort of residing inside. You can get cut off on the freeway, or someone can ask you, a favor. Can I have a cup of sugar? No! Sorry. Now, how could a simple statement or request bring that sort of rage unless someone goes through life feeling like they're cornered all the time? And they're nice and they put up with this, but all the time rage is being created inside. And sometimes it explodes. Proverbs says that if we don't have control over our spirit, we're like a city without walls. See, we think of angry people as being strong and in control, and the Scripture says the opposite, that anger is a sign of feeling like I'm out of control inside, like a city without walls. It's a great picture of boundaries. And a lot of times, people will just get a frown and they'll pull out the nuclear arsenal against that. Why would you do that if you didn't feel powerless in the world? So a lot of times, angry sorts of reactions are signs of boundary problems. What we call obsessive-compulsive problems. I've got a friend who, whenever she feels out of control, she starts vacuuming. Now, I don't mean vacuuming, I mean vacuuming. We're talking the ceiling, the pets, the yard, the kids. Why does she do that? Well, because things will be going on that she's not setting boundaries with, and she's trying to control others, and we always feel out of control when we do that. And we can develop ritualistic, compulsive sorts of ways of trying to gain a sense of control. So we'll control dirt, or we'll control germs, or we'll control, something in some sort of an obsessive way because the rest of life feels so out of control. And a lot of times, obsessive-compulsive problems, not being able to stop thoughts, for example, because we've lost volitional control, the ability to choose what we're going to think about or not think about, ruminations, worry, a lot of times this is an obsessive problem that's caused by boundary problems because basically we've lost control of our minds, our feelings, our bodies, all of that. Signs of boundary problems. How about compulsive behaviors? Compulsive behaviors. Eating is a big one. I remember talking to a lady one time who had gained an enormous amount of weight. And she came into therapy, and I said, "Why are you here?" And she said, "Well, because I want to lose the weight." And I said, "Okay, we can work on that." And she began to talk about diets and her plan and discipline and all of this. And she says, "I'm just not disciplined. And if I were just more obedient, because I know this is a sin and I just need to work on that." And I said, "You know what? I don't really think that eating is the sin. I think you've got a sin," as I heard her story. "But I don't think it's eating." And she said, "What is it?" I said, "I think you're a liar." Now, if you want to really incur wrath, tell someone who has spent a career at being a nice person that they're a liar. And they will smile at you, and you can feel the venom, because all of their safety in life has depended upon being seen as good. And all the while, there are a lot of their own hurts, their wishes, their needs, their boundaries that they're not communicating in relationship, and they're nodding yes when they mean no. And that's what I meant by "you're a liar." And I said, what I want you to do is I want you to notice over the next month how many times you say yes when you mean no. How many times when you say that's okay when the truth is no, that's not okay. Because what she had done is she had built a wall around her, a physical wall, and later, after she lost it, she said that. She said that I had constructed a boundary around me of fat where no one could get in because I didn't have the strength to set boundaries and keep them out. Now, there are a lot of other symptoms, but we want to orient you today towards the idea of stop seeing the problem as the problem. The problem is never the problem. The fruit says that there's something wrong with the tree. And very oftentimes in life, what's wrong with the tree is that we have incredible boundary problems, and those are causing clinical symptoms.
Henry talked about the clinical symptoms of boundary problems. And it's amazing. What we found is that many people's depressions, anxiety, compulsive behaviors can be tied in to some sort of an inability to set limits where they needed to. It's much easier to see this in relationships, and this is our next section. In relationships. Because that's sort of where we live and breathe, is who's important to you. Who do you spend your time needing something from, feeling frustrated with, wanting to be closer to, having to resolve conflict with. And there are two sorts of conflicts that are boundary problems. And the first one has to do with a loss of freedom. Relational conflicts that involve a loss of freedom. See, God meant attachment, God meant closeness to each other to be something in which you could be free to be closer or to further away as you needed to. That's how Jesus handled it. When he had to go across to leave the masses in the boat, he went there to spend time with the Father. He felt free to leave that, and I'm sure there were some people there that were saying, gosh, I thought you loved me, Jesus. But he knew he had to do that. And in relationships where that freedom doesn't exist, people don't feel like they have a choice to be closer, to move further, to agree, to disagree. And there are two sorts of these freedom-busting relationships that occur. The first is when there is some direct controller, direct control. And this is basically a person who has boundary violations trying to be close to a person who is a boundary hater, a boundary violator, the boundary victim and a boundary violator. Now, it's generally a person who can't say no, who is with a person who what? Can't hear no. Has grown up thinking no meant yes in 10 minutes. And these sorts of people really attract each other. It's just amazing how a person who's used to kind of being victimized by controlling people will meet, fall in love with, marry, and have several children by a boundary hater. There's something in that they can't explain. So what happens is in this relationship, you try to do your best. You try to be loved. You try to be easy to get along with. And the boundary hater all the time is wanting more and wanting more and wants to be able to have all the freedoms, and the boundary violatee has no freedom. I was dealing with a marital situation one time where this happened in couples therapy, where the woman was telling me about her husband, Jim Godzilla, and how he was the scariest guy in her life, and how he just kept her under control because of his anger and his rage and his tantrum and his threatening, and she wanted me to meet him. And so I said, bring him in. And so I was waiting for, 6'5" guy with fire coming out of his mouth. And in comes this about 80, no, he wasn't 80, he was probably 63-year-old, little bald guy, about 5 feet tall, with a real high voice. And he sat down, and I looked at his wife, and I said, where's your husband? And she says, can't you just tell? Can't you just tell what a controlling person he is? And I said, maybe I need to get to know him more. But over time, I found out that he really was that way, but that she had put all kinds of power into him. The boundary victim always puts power into the boundary violator and gives them power they don't have or deserve. Second kind of controlling relationship is the manipulative relationship, and that one's worse. That one's worse because with the direct controlling person who says, I don't like it that you won't give me your money, time, sex, understanding, whatever, you know where the badness is, you know where the evil lies. But with the manipulative relationship, the boundary hater is indirect. The boundary hater goes around the corner. The boundary hater will say things like, you don't have time to talk, well, that's okay, I guess I'll just be lonely for a while. Or my needs just aren't that important anyway, are they? Now, why is that more dangerous than the direct boundary violator? You can't see it. And then who's the bad guy? See, then you take the badness inside. God allows us to have a certain amount of badness and selfishness and things, the ways that we mess up. And that's enough for today. The scriptures say, you've got enough trouble for today, don't worry too much about tomorrow. And the boundary victim will feel intense sorts of responsibility for the indirect person who is good at giving the guilt messages. So, number one, look at the loss of freedom. Are you with a direct boundary violator, a boundary hater, or are you with an indirect manipulative one? You can always tell if they cannot hear your no and resist it at some level. In terms of the indirect one, the scriptures say in Proverbs that a lying tongue conceals wrath. A lying tongue conceals wrath. And if the person you're with is never angry, they're lying. Just like in Henry's example. They will resist the no, but they won't say it. Second kind of relationships, besides the loss of freedom, are loss of love. Loss of love. God meant relationships to give us something. We are to serve, but we're not to serve until we have been loved. We're not to wash someone's feet until someone's washed our feet. That's how we're supposed to grow up in love in a family where we can go out and give something out. And in attachment conflicts, what you find is there's a lot of conditionality. In other words, you don't feel safe being loved or loving in the relationship. For example, lots of people will feel like they're on eggshells in a relationship. And if they start telling the truth and disagreeing and saying, I don't want to watch this TV show or go to this group or have this for dinner, that they're afraid someone is going to pull away from them, to leave them, and to abandon them. So they live in fear. When you lose attachment, what happens is you move into a non-love position of fear. 1 John 4:18 says that perfect love casts out fear. The eggshell relationship, where you're always afraid if you say the wrong thing they'll leave, is a relationship of fear. And so what happens over time is that any love that really existed begins to diminish. Lots of people have found that their hearts become cold towards someone else because they don't feel free to say no. If you don't feel free to say no, you can't love. So begin looking at your relational symptoms. Have I found that I've lost my freedom, my ability to disagree, my ability to make separate choices, my ability to move a different direction? That's my freedom. Or have I found that I can't love, that I can't feel safe, that I can't reach out, that I can't take in the good from the outside? Those are the two biggest danger signals that a boundary problem exists in a relationship.
Okay, one more area of fruit. Have you ever heard the old saying, well, I'm just a people person, I'm not very task-oriented? Usually said to a boss, which really means I'm lazy and irresponsible. And then their counterpart that says, well, I'm not very people-oriented, I'm very task-oriented, which really means I'm a jerk. But what we do is we try to see ourselves, in one area and forget that we have problems in others. And people even write books nowadays saying, well, you're just this type. It's like sanctifying pathology. I'm split up, and we'll just call that a God-given type or temperament or something. When God says that we are created in His image, which means that I am supposed to be able to do tasks and I am supposed to be able to love. 1 John says that what? That you can tell people of the faith because of what they believe, because they believe correctly. They know who Jesus is. Because they practice righteousness, which has to do with functioning in life, what we do, and because we love. And if we have an area of life that doesn't work, don't write that off as, well, I just don't have that gift. No, we're created in God's image. And we may be better at tasks and not good at love, but we need to improve in love. We may be better at love and not good in tasks, but we need to work on the task area. Okay? So, section number 3 of symptoms is this, functional symptoms. task-oriented symptoms. Let me list a few, starting with probably the most common boundary symptom is the inability for someone to complete a goal or to complete a task. The inability, basically, to follow through. You ever know anyone that has started like 5 graduate programs? Or had all of these career goals and they were great ideas, but nothing ever really happened? Or a coworker, when you hand them something, it's like tossing it into the black hole, never to be seen again. Why does that happen? Why do oftentimes we have goals and somehow we never end up there? Well, boundaries are what gives us a sense of purpose. See, purpose has direction in it. And if we don't have good boundaries, we're not in control of our ship, and we don't know where we're sailing, and the wind is going to take us wherever we want to, or it wants us to, and not where we want to go. See, boundaries say what? No. Boundaries say, I won't do that. And if I'm headed to point A, when an influence or a wind or a desire from the inside to like hang a right for a day or a year or a decade happens, then, and I can't say no to that person or to that competing desire inside of me that takes me away from where I'm headed, then I will never finish anything. I'll never reach a goal because I can't say no to other requests. Ephesians 2:10 says that we're God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works that have been laid down beforehand. Now what that means is that in my life and in your life, there's this path of good works out there that fit your desires, your gifts, your abilities. And that we're supposed to have boundaries enough, like Romans 12 says, to know what our own gifts are, what our own mission is, and not be conformed to the pressures of the world to take a right or to take a left. I remember a doctor who had a lot of pressure to become one from his family and didn't say no to that, whose practice was riddled with malpractice. He would do things like leave scissors in people. Okay? Well, he gave in to the parental pressure, and because he was bright enough to do that, he did it, but his behavior kept sabotaging him. And we have boundary problems, and we can't take dominion and control over our own desires and our own wants and our own goals and be in a true relationship with God to hack that out, where we work out our salvation with fear and trembling because it's God who is at work in us. That's a relationship where people have to be honest with each other. And see, a lot of functional problems in life, a lot of the inability to, quote, find one's niche, is because somebody can't draw boundaries around themselves and say, what do I want? What are my talents? What are my desires? Or am I doing this for mom or for dad or for the pastor or for whomever? And a lot of inability to meet goals, to follow through, to pursue dreams. See, a real goal, a real God-given desire is not something that we make ourselves do. It's something that in no way can we even think about not doing. It's a passion. It's a calling. And when we really get in touch with our hearts and know what drives us, it's not how, what am I going to do? It's how am I going to do this? And that's what real passion about ministry, about life, about marriage, about child rearing, it comes from owning our heart. And we can't do that without boundaries. Okay, other functional problems. What about extreme disorganization? Boundaries have to do with internal structure. Now, this is kind of hard to understand, but if you remember developmentally, where a child learns to be organized is in the 2nd year of life or so, because that's where boundaries are created. And if we haven't had good limits in our life, good structures, people saying no, our saying no, then it's like John said, our skin, is spread out all over the place, and your pancreas is in Detroit, and your foot is somewhere else. And that's how our lives look. And a lot of times, people who have boundary problems and have been severely violated in terms of boundaries, just their lives are so disorganized that you can't even begin to start anywhere. And you have to get a big, in a relationship, a big like sweeper and sweep up all of those pieces into a circle that you can begin to call them, where they can begin to organize, their projects and their wants and all of that. So a lot of times feeling very scattered, people who have 12 careers and 100 projects and on and on and on, and can't get anything done, that's a boundary symptom. Another one that affects our functioning has to do with our energy level. You ever felt like you just didn't have the energy to get through the job? A lot of times that's one of the first symptoms of burnout, which is always a boundary problem. Because there's a gnawing inside of, I'm doing what I feel compelled to do or have to do and not what I feel called to do or want to do. And there is a slow burning resentment inside that begins to take energy away. Remember when Moses was trying to fix everybody? And his father-in-law said, Moses, what are you doing? He said, from morning until evening you're sitting here, and Moses goes, basically, well, they need me. Sounds like a codependent, right? I've got all of these cases to judge, and they have disputes, and they need me. And Jethro goes, what you are doing is not good. What a great boundary statement. That we do good things, but we can do them, and it's not good to do them because our boundaries are overextended. Well, a lot of times, if we are feeling a loss of energy, it's because even though we're doing good things, it's not good because they weren't boundaried choices. As 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, in our giving, that we should purpose in our heart to give, not under compulsion or begrudgingly. Not because someone puts pressure on me or because of some should inside. It should be free. And energy problems in work are a lot of times related to the depression of boundary problems in our lives. And lastly, problems of concentration. This is another clinical symptom of depression. And what it is an intrusion or a fogginess within one's mind where you start to focus on something and work on it, and you just can't stay there. You're going somewhere else. Well, a lot of times that's because there are so many things that have taken up space inside and are depressing and are unresolved and on and on and on that we haven't drawn boundaries around and said no to, that there is no mental space inside to work. God has designed our mind to have sort of like a part of it that's sort of like a workbench. And it's a place where we can take an issue or a task or something and pull it out of the file and think about it and have a place to observe it, have a place to think about our thinking. And that's called concentration, where we can focus. And if that is all cloudy and it's not working, then oftentimes it's a symptom of a boundary problem.